This is microeconomics, and we are talking about Chapter 14 today, Firms in Competitive Markets. You all will remember when we were buying and selling trucks in here, and you all were split up as buyers and sellers. I told you to pretend that everybody who was selling a truck had the same one. Remember? And I told you all that I'd switch all up evenly, so we had an even number of buyers and sellers so that no one had any or too much control over the price. It was perfect information. You could hear what was going on, and I was recording the prices of each transaction, so you knew what the transactions, the prices of the transactions were every single time. We were assuming, and everything up to until now, in Chapter 4 when we were talking about supply and demand, we were assuming a competitive market. And so all of these things are going to seem very familiar to you. Many buyers and sellers, a homogeneous, standardized, identical, any of those words mean the same thing, product, and each buyer and seller is a price taker. So if you were, we gave the example, if you were the only seller, you'd have much more control over the price, right? But if there are so many sellers here, if somebody doesn't like your price, they can wait for someone else to call out a price, find another seller, right? So if there are so many other sellers that no buyer has to depend on you, then you're what's called a price taker. And that price is going to be determined by the market, not necessarily what you have any control over. And also, we say that firms have they can freely enter or exit. That means there are no barriers to entry. So that means it's very easy for us to start a business in this industry, and it's very easy for a competitor to come in and copy you. So all of these assumptions are in place when we're talking about competitive markets. So keep these things in mind as we're going through the chapter. Well, even though firms in competitive markets are price takers, they still want to make a profit. And so we assume in economics that no matter which market structure we're in, even if it's a competitive market and they're price takers, there's still that goal of existing to maximize profit. And you all remember that profit is revenue, total revenue, minus total costs. You'll also recall that revenue is equal to price times quantity. So if a competitive firm is a price taker, and they just have to take the price that has been determined by the market, people are probably going to pay about what other people have been paying for that product before in previous rounds. If you think about it in terms of our activity, so if they don't have any control over this, what is one thing they can do to increase revenue? So this is given.
Make more.
That's right. Make more, sell more. So one thing they can do to increase revenue and hopefully profit is to make more. All right. We've talked about average costs last time, and you'll remember if we're looking for average fixed costs, you just find regular fixed costs and divide by the quantity that we've made, right? Well, with revenue, it's the same thing. We just find total revenue, and it's divided by whatever quantity that we're at. And this answers the question of how much does the firm receive for a typical unit? The example in the book was a gallon of milk. Or how much does the firm receive for a typical book that we sell? That's what average revenue is getting at. So, different than marginal revenue. Remember, we talked about marginal costs last time. So marginal revenue, we're actually calculating it out unit by unit. How much does that next book or gallon of milk that we sell bring in terms of revenue for the firm? Okay, this is going to be true for all firms. Average revenue is going to be equal to the price of which we're selling it at. But this is only true in competitive markets. The marginal revenue of the book that we sell is going to be equal to the price that we sell it at. And here's an example with numbers so you can see. Okay, again, I believe this is gallons of milk that we're talking about. And so we're just going down one by one in terms of quantity. The price, remember, price takers, they're just going to have to accept the price of, this is really expensive milk. So one gallon is $6, and they're going to get $6 for every single gallon that they sell, right? And so total revenue, as y'all know, is price times quantity. Average revenue would be this column divided by this column. And we said on the previous slide, average revenue is equal to price, and you can see why, because of the math here. And in this case, marginal revenue for competitive firms, remember, it's the change in total revenue. So you take the 12 minus 6, 18 minus 12, and then divide by the change in quantity, and in this case, it's always 1. So 3 minus 2 is 1, 4 minus 3 is 1, and that just goes in the denominator there. In this case, marginal revenue is also true, so for also 6. So with a competitive firm, price is always going to equal these two things as well. And that's important to remember when we actually graph these revenue curves. All right, so if the goal is to maximize profit, hopefully a firm is going to be able to produce where total revenue minus total cost is the greatest to, obviously maximize profit there. And one way they can find where this point is to look at marginal revenue versus marginal cost. Okay, so if the money that we're going to be able to bring in by producing one more gallon of milk, so if we can sell it for, in this case, $6, and it costs us $5 to produce it, it makes sense to go ahead and make that gallon of milk, right? If we can bring in more money than it's costing us to make that one unit. That's what we're talking about with marginal cost and marginal revenue. Okay, if it costs us $8, and we said in the short run there are always some fixed variables or some fixed resource. There might be plant size or equipment, and at some point we're going to see costs increase, right? We've got those U-shaped curves with cost curves. If we get to that point and the cost of making one more gallon of milk is greater than what we're going to bring in for it, in terms of the money that we're going to make off it, then it makes sense to stop and not make more. Or not take that extra sales call if the gas that you're going to spend getting out to the client is going to be more than what you'd be able to make off of maybe your consultation, whatever they're going to pay you. We can also identify this point on a table. So intuitively it makes sense, but we can also identify it using the data that is given. Okay, we said we're going to produce up to the point where the money that we get for our product, for that next unit of product, is greater than the cost of producing that product or service, right? So how many gallons of product should we sell?
5.
All right, so y'all are saying 4 or 5, let's see. 4, we're still making more per unit than it's costing us to make it, right? And then right here it's equal. And actually it would be 5 because you produce up to the amount where it's equal and then you don't go past that. So we can identify this point of profit maximization on a table too, given some data. We can also find this profit maximization point graphically too. You'll recall from last time that the marginal cost curve is upward sloping. It's like that big fish hook that goes up through the middle and it crosses the bottom of all of those U-shaped cost curves. And just remember, we've seen this before already, but in competitive markets, price is equal to these two things, average revenue and marginal revenue. Before we get to the graph, just one more thing, just to summarize what we've said so far, if the money that we're bringing in for each additional unit is greater than the cost of producing it, we should go ahead and increase. This is what we call the golden rule of profit maximization. If marginal costs of that unit equals the marginal revenue, that is where we're maximizing profit. Okay, this, just make a start by this, write down golden rule of profit maximization. This is true in any firm any firm in any market structure that we'll talk about. By the way, we're talking about perfect competition today. Next time we'll talk about monopolies, and then the time after that we'll talk about monopolistic competition, and then oligopolies. And different market structures are just based on how many competitors you have and how you're able to differentiate, how much you're able to differentiate your product. So in this market, no differentiation. Lots and lots of competitors. Oops. So figure 1. Okay, what did we just say the profit, or the golden rule of profit maximization is again?
Or it's equal, MR or MC.
Okay, well, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So where is that on this graph?
DMAC.
Okay, right here. Here's marginal cost, here's marginal revenue, right here. If this is the point of profit maximization, remember I asked you with the gallons of, I think it's milk in there, but $6 for a gallon of milk is kind of a lot. So you all said 5 gallons of milk. Well, here graphically you can find where they meet, and if I asked you on a quiz or test what's the profit maximizing quantity that this firm should produce at, you go straight down. You found that point and you go straight down. That's the quantity that's going to maximize profit. If I ask you what price they're going to be able to charge to maximize profit in competitive firms, all you have to do is go back to that point and go straight across. Because remember, they're only going to be able to charge at one price. They're a price taker. And you all remember, have we seen this before? For a firm that can only charge one price, where have we seen that before? A horizontal demand curve.
Elastic.
Okay, for something that has perfectly elastic demand, that means there's lots of substitutes. They can only sell at that one price. If they tried to, if this was $5 and they tried to sell for the same product for $6, $7, there's no demand there because people could easily switch and find another company with the same product. So remember, this goes along with competitive firm, homogeneous, standardized product, and very elastic demand. So in this case, if I asked you for a competitive firm, what's the profit maximizing price? You just go straight across here. And in this case, it's also equal to marginal revenue and equal to average revenue. In the next market structures, the demand curve is going to be downward sloping, and then you'll be able to find marginal cost equals marginal revenue, go straight down for quantity, but then you're going to have to remember, in my other market structures, I'm going to have to go all the way up to the demand curve. Just in this one, you can go straight across because they're price takers. Okay. All right, so that's just talking about profit maximization and finding it on a graph, finding it on a table. Now we're going to think about some other decision making that a firm in a competitive market has to think about.
Can I ask you a question? Can you redefine what price taker is?
There is no control of an individual firm over the price that they're going to sell at.
Meaning all the competition is providing what the standardized price is.
The standardized product, and the price has been determined by the market. Yeah, and they're just going to have to take the price that's given. And that's why firms in this is a theoretical, this in real life, firms work really, really hard to say that Dr. Pepper tastes so much better than Coke, right? And they spend so much money on packaging and getting you to be loyal to their brand. So they try really hard to differentiate their products so that they can have a little bit of control over the price. In real life, for a competitive market, if you all just think of regular milk. I know in real life we have soy milk, we've got 2%, 1%, and all sorts of types of milk, but just regular milk. We just narrow the market to that. It doesn't matter which brand you buy, it's just milk, right? Or bottled water, it's just H2O. I know Fuji has that really nice packaging, and you've got the sports bottles and things like that. So in real life, companies have tried really hard to differentiate, but just regular bottled water or corn. Just regular corn, not organic, not anything, just regular corn. So those are some examples of a standardized homogeneous product. All right, so if they're going to be thinking about other decision making, what your author's talking about maybe shutting down or exiting the industry completely, your author just points out that they're going to make those decisions based on their costs. And we've talked about marginal costs last time, and you can think of that as the willingness and ability, relating to the willingness and ability of a firm to supply this product at different prices. It's based on the marginal cost of producing it. So, y'all remember that total cost is equal to fixed and variable costs. If we're covering those, this is the part of the marginal cost curve that we're going to be operating on, right? You can think of this as the supply curve right here, and don't think of this part because a firm is not going to be able to keep going if they can't pay for rent and insurance and their labor and all this stuff down here.
So they need to be above that.
Yeah.
ATC and MC point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, above average total cost. That's going to be what you can think of as the supply curve for a firm. Okay, so then we're going to come back to this. Your author talks about shutting down versus exiting the industry. So just make a note to yourself of what he's talking about. Shutting down means closing our doors temporarily. Okay, you can't go to Shipley's Donuts for dinner, right? Because they're closed. They're only open at breakfast and up until a little bit after lunch. According to your author's terminology, they have shut down for dinner. And y'all can probably think of other places that are only open for dinner and not open for breakfast, right? So it can just be, or HEB right here on 19th, they close at midnight. So they shut down for the night until, I don't know what it is, 6 a.m. probably in the morning. So this is closing our doors temporarily. It could be overnight, or it could also be for a part of the year. There's an example in the book about outdoor miniature golf courses. Usually people are there in the summers. Or, I tried to go to the Slippery Minnow. Have y'all been out there, out by the lake? It's a restaurant and they have really good food. But I tried to go out there during Christmas break, and I was so disappointed. Everything was closed and shut down, and then I checked their website, and they said, well, we're going to open back up in March. Well, they've got a lot of outdoor seating, and they probably figured that they're going to get more business during the months when it's warmer outside. And it's really fun to go out there. It's a little different. You kind of feel like you're just, well, you are right there on the lake, and you can feed your French fries to the huge catfish out there, if y'all seen. So closing for a part of the year, that's also included in your author's definition of shutting down. All right. Well, even if the Slippery Minnow shuts down for part of the year, they're still having to pay rent, right, and insurance on those months that they're not open, from November to March, whenever they were closed. So this is a temporary closing of the doors. Exiting the firm means going out of business completely. It's a long-run decision to leave the market, and we're not paying rent anymore, we're not paying insurance anymore. You can think of businesses that we used to have here and aren't here anymore. Krispy Kreme, Blockbuster,
Dunkin' Donuts.
Is there still a Dunkin' Donuts in the student union building at Baylor? They've taken that away? Okay. Well, so going, like just leaving completely, that's what your author defines as exiting. It's a long-run decision. We're not paying rent anymore, but this is shutting down. This is, should we be open for 24 hours or maybe 8 hours out of the day? We're still having to pay fixed costs there. All right, so a firm, when they're deciding on the short-run decision of whether to close down temporarily, what does your author say? You're still going to have to pay rent, insurance, fixed costs. So the decision on whether or not we should stay open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or 12 months out of the year, should be based on variable costs. If fixed costs, we're going to have to pay anyway. This is our decision. Should we go ahead and stay open for lunch and dinner? It's going to be based on, can we cover variable costs? Okay, so this is total overall, and so if you divide by quantity, you're going to get, remember, total revenue by quantity is going to be, price. So is the price of lunch, price of a meal that we sell for, what the customer is going to pay, is that going to cover our average variable costs of producing that meal? Our food, your wait staff, and if we're talking about a restaurant, your author's saying that they should go ahead and not be open for dinner if they can't at least cover the variable costs. The price of the meal can't cover that. Okay, so going back to figure 3, and I'm actually going to take back what I said earlier. I'm going to specify a little bit more. We said this part is the supply curve, and we said that it needs to be above average total costs for a firm to be profitable, but that's really in the long run. Short-run decision, should we stay open 24 hours or should we close for part of the day? Your author says as long as you can cover average variable costs, should go ahead and operate. So not only on this part, but this part too.
So you should operate in that area and shut down below.
In the short run,
Okay.
if you can still cover variable costs, you should still produce. Because fixed costs we should consider as sunk costs. You all know for your apartment rent, you pay at the beginning of the month, and you can't do anything about it. You can't recover that. Even if you're out of town the whole month, or you stay with a friend the whole month, it doesn't matter. You still have already paid for it, and your author says that we should ignore those when we're making those short-run decisions. All right, and we've talked about variable costs. And for example, for a restaurant, it would be your wait staff and how much it costs for you for the ingredients for your food. Fixed costs for a restaurant would be like the dishes and the furniture and all of your equipment. And going along with what we were just talking about. So short run, shutdown decision. Should we still stay open for lunch or dinner as long as we can cover the variable costs? Okay, exiting the business, leaving completely. Your author considers that a long-run decision. Okay, so for the short run, we were just thinking about variable costs because we were considering fixed costs as sunk. You can't do anything about it. Now, should we still stay open or leave the Waco market, for example, completely? Your author says now we have to consider variable costs and fixed costs. So, this is for total, or if you're thinking about it per unit. If we cannot bring in enough money, this is the price that the consumer is going to pay. If that's less then our average total cost, taking into account rent, insurance, fixed costs, then we need to close our doors completely, leave the business, go out of business. And that's what I was talking about before. The long run supply curve is the area that's above average total cost. So as long as the price of our product is above average total cost, then we can still produce. Okay, and I'll show you how to find profit, and we can actually measure profit or just identify it on a graph, but this would be the formula for it. You already know this. Profit is equal to total cost, total revenue minus total costs, and then loss is equal to total cost minus total revenue. So let's take a look at a competitive firm that is making profit. That's panel A. Okay, here's price. Here's where it meets marginal costs. Okay, if the price is above our minimum point for average total cost, then we're obviously making a profit. As long as the price that we are charging customers for lunch is greater than our cost of producing it, then we're making a profit there. And where is the profit? Price times quantity, and then you take away, that's total revenue, remember, and then you subtract costs, which would be, you find that minimum point of where average total cost is, and then come back out to the vertical axis, and this whole big thing would be total revenue. This is just the profit rectangle after you take into account costs. All right, so losses. A firm that is making a loss, the price is going to be lower than that minimum point on the average total cost curve, right? So if the price that we can sell at is way down here, y'all can see this is our total revenue. Oh, I'm sorry, from P to Q, that would be total revenue. But, I mean, our costs are above that. So that's our loss rectangle right there. Okay, so make sure you're able to identify these graphs and maybe practice drawing them out yourself. That would be good too. But figure 5, both A and B, will be really important. So we said in the short run, we've got some fixed variables, some fixed resource for a particular firm. In the short run, for a market, for an industry, the number of firms is fixed. And we've talked about market supply before. If we were going to add up the quantity supplied by each firm, that would be how much these firms are willing and able to supply at each price. But remember, in the long run, we're able to expand our factories, right? And buy more equipment if we're talking about an individual firm. If we're talking about the market as a whole, in the long run, remember, with competitive markets, there's no barriers to entry. Anybody can come in and start doing what you're doing. In the long run, market supply, and any firm can enter or exit the market. If the price of the product, and as an individual firm, you're going to be really happy about this, right? If the price that you can sell for a meal at your restaurant is greater than the cost, you're making a positive profit. But what are future competitors going to do? They're seeing that you're making money, you've got a lot of customers there. That's going to attract them to come in and open a restaurant similar to yours and take away some of your business because they're trying to capture some of that profit too. Now, obviously, this is not good for you, and you may leave the market, and other competitors are going to see, well, if you're not being successful, they're not going to enter the market too. Okay, theoretically, in the very, very long run, this going back and forth of people entering and exiting and affecting the price that we're going to be able to charge is going to result in this. Firms who are still in the market are going to have zero economic profit. You'll remember from last time, economic profit is taking into account explicit costs and implicit costs, right? So if you've got zero economic profit, you're just indifferent as to whether or not you should stay here. You're just as better off whether or not opening my own business or working for someone else when you take into account the implicit costs of what you could have been making if you worked for someone else. So the zero profit condition would be right there where price is hitting that minimum point of average total costs. And it sounds really weird. Why in the world would competitive firms stay in business if they're making zero profit? I mean, we just said the goal is to maximize profit. All right, this is, in theory, in the very, very long run, if you're able to go ahead and make profit, you're going to attract competitors to enter the industry. Do y'all have this slide? You do? Okay. Did it not come out on yours? Okay. I'll help you out with that, Becky, afterwards. And these slides just explain what's going to happen on the graphs in Figure A. So let me just go ahead and, you've got the text here, I'll go ahead and just explain what they're talking about. Okay, just ignore that long run supply for now. Let's just pretend that this is the market for frozen yogurt in Waco 15 years ago. Okay, supply and demand, you'll know where to find equilibrium, quantity, and price that people are going to pay. That's for the market of frozen yogurt sellers here, and then for a particular firm, let's pretend this is TCBY. This is the price that they have taken that was determined by the market, and right there, and this is right where they're not making any profit or loss. They're just breaking even right there. So, zero profit.
How do they come to price? Is it just a...
With this?
Yeah. How do they define where that line is?
Okay, this is just defined by equilibrium and the invisible hand, the interaction between buyers and sellers, just like we did with the toy trucks.
So pretty much
in this class.
Trial and error with... and then
determined by the market. Okay. Mm-hmm. And wait for all the graphics to show up. All right, so again, just ignore this black line for now. That was the equilibrium, what was going on. Okay, let's say that people are getting healthier. They prefer frozen yogurt to ice cream, and they think that this is, a healthier alternative. So if consumer tastes change, y'all know this already. Demand's going to shift to the right, and then what happens to the equilibrium price? Okay, increases. Well, what is that going to do for TCBY? Increase their profits, right? Okay, well, where are some other places that you can get frozen yogurt now? I don't think we even have TCBY anymore.
3 spoons.
Okay, 3 spoons, Osos, U-Swirl, all of those, think of all those competitors. They saw what TCBY was doing and they said, aha, there are some profits to be had. Consumers' tastes have changed. They want more frozen yogurt at every price, as shown by the second red demand curve. And so when all of those other competitors come in, that's characterized by a rightward shift of supply. Right? Okay, So we started out at A, went to B when consumers changed, and then what happens when all of those competitors come in? We end up at C. And then what happens to prices?
Drops
The
back
supply shifts to the right. Okay, that impacts price to go down further, and then we end up back at the long run equilibrium. So in theory, and we're talking years and years and years, short run profits are going to attract competitors because in this market it's a standardized product that you can't differentiate, and it's very easy for anybody to come in and open up a frozen yogurt shop or place, and what's going to happen to prices? It's going to come right back down to where we're not going to have, the firms that are left are not going to have any incentive to leave the market because they're going to be just as better off opening that frozen yogurt business or leaving to go somewhere else. So obviously TCBY, for whatever reason, maybe their costs were too high, they decided to go out of business and leave Waco here. And the other guys are still here operating at this, well, they will be operating at this price in the very long run. And that's what your author is saying. And it's just taking into account, in theory, if we had all of those conditions that we said at the beginning, homogeneous product, easy entry and exit, and anybody can copy you easily. So that's
why Krispy Kremes did what they did. They jumped into the market, and when they were making the profit, and then it dropped back down to that for the long run, that's when they closed their doors and walked away. Because they knew that it was never going to increase from that point.
yes, but in that case, it was, demand shifting to the left. There was a lot of people. The Atkins diet was really popular, and
I was
a lot
they're
of.
too sweet personally.
I've never liked. I never liked them. They're great for one or two, and that's it.
Okay, and that's the end of chapter 14 slides.
Sorry.